Welcome everyone to our April workshop. Our April workshop for Splash Media U is all about LinkedIn and using the strategy LinkedIn suggests for marketing because they use it themselves. Want to welcome everybody who joined us today. We've done some Facebook posts, some Twitter posts about our workshop today, and some of you may be joining us because you joined previous workshops. Anyway, we're glad to have you here. My name is Duncan Gilman. I am the Dean of Students for Splash Media U. Also joining us today is Julio Lebron, great social media professional, incredibly knowledgeable in the social media world. And Julio is going to be, as you may have seen in the chat window, moderating for us. He's going to be answering some of the questions that you type in, and I'll keep the chat window open as long as I can as well, as long as it's not blocking my screen, so that I can chime in. And of course, we'll chime in at the end to see if there are any unanswered questions that we can answer there for you. If you scroll back up through the chat screen a little bit, you can see that we are also on Twitter, and feel free to join that conversation as we present the workshop today using the hashtag #SplashWorkshop. There are a couple of ways to join in our polls today. We've got a couple of three poll questions. Julio's going to be tweeting those with that hashtag. I think Julio's probably tweeting. Julio, are you tweeting? Feel free to answer on the chat window. Are you tweeting from Splash Media U or from yourself, your own account? Splash. Okay, great. He was answering on the chat window. Splash Media. Perfect. Okay, so Julio's going to be tweeting from the Splash Media U account at Splash Media U. But of course, you can also search for that hashtag. But again, feel free to put in the answer to your poll question right here in the chat window. A couple of resources that I think will be very valuable for you, not only as we go through the workshop today, but also after the fact. If you heard me before we got started, I mentioned that we're going to be part of the inspiration for this workshop came from an infographic that LinkedIn partnered with a marketing service called Column 5 Media. So we're going to be referring back to that infographic and some of the great stats that they offer throughout today's workshop. So it might be a helpful resource to go visit the infographic itself, and hopefully you can find it somewhere buried in column5media.com. Again, this is a great infographic that Column 5 partnered with LinkedIn to produce about LinkedIn's own tips and marketing strategies for using the platform. So we'll be referring to some of these. Of course, LinkedIn.com will be a couple times I'll be going back and forth to LinkedIn to show you a couple of things. What I recommend you do if you have the screen space available is have LinkedIn open so you can see some of the things that we're looking at on your own screen. Of course, I'm going to be switching back and forth so you can see them on mine. And finally, as I mentioned again just before we got started, we are recording today's workshop, and you can find it after we're done today at youtube.com/splashmediau. We've got all of our previous workshops, some great stuff in there, and you can see those archives as well on YouTube. I think some of these cases pardon me, in some of these cases we also share them on Facebook, but so a couple places to revisit this information after the fact. If you take away nothing from, oh gosh, I hope you take away something. If you take away nothing besides this from our workshop today, this is what you should take away. You may be familiar with the old adage, it's not personal, it's just business. I think in LinkedIn, it's both personal and business. It's business and personal, not one or the other. And I think it's very important to remember that a successful LinkedIn presence comes from the one-on-one interactions you have with other members. You're not going to have LinkedIn success just by, and this is to a certain extent true for any social media platform, but you don't see success just by posting. That is not where the value of LinkedIn or any social media platform is. And I think we get caught up in the professional side of LinkedIn, and we think of it as only business. So I want to stress the one thing you must take away from today's workshop is that LinkedIn is business and it is personal. And making it personal, speaking of making it personal, let's turn this over to you for a second and ask our first poll question. Again, you can participate right here in the chat window or on Twitter. What value do you get from networking? And I'm not talking about LinkedIn necessarily, specifically at first, but just networking in general from your standpoint in your industry. What value do you get from that? I'd love to find out from you where you see the value in networking. Does it increase your sales? Does it just make you more aware of what's going on in your industry? Do you make friends? That's certainly valuable enough. Do you make friends in your industry and businesses, acquaintances that stay with you throughout your career? That's very valuable. What kind of value do you get from the networking that you do or that you don't do? I mean, maybe you feel like maybe that's part of the reason you decided to join us for today's workshop. You feel like you don't quite do enough networking, and LinkedIn is certainly a great way to get started. Feel free to just think about your answer or type it in as we go. We can always come back to it. I've got my chat window up here. We're going to be talking about, again, a couple of these stats, and we can always come back to some of these answers. Laura Lynn answered direct contact to other people. That's great. I think we get so narrow-minded and so focused. Some of us have sort of a one-track mind, and we lose sight of the fact that there are other people working in our industries. There are other people out there doing what we're doing with similar goals, and networking is a great way to keep that personal contact. So I love that answer. Direct contact is incredibly important, especially in the increasingly diverse way we use social media. It's easy to feel disconnected. It's easy to feel like you're working in a vacuum because you can just type something on social media, type out an email even, and you feel disconnected. So that direct contact that you get from networking is increasingly important. So here are a couple of ways we can use some of the stats, these great stats that we found on LinkedIn's secret sauce infographic, talking about that value, that very value that we have in our industries for networking. One way you can get some more value out of the content that you put on LinkedIn is to use more content that you would engage with. What kind of content do you see and love? And from LinkedIn's standpoint, this includes content that has stats, that has pictures, that has something that grabs the audience. Again, a lot of this info that we're talking about today is directly from LinkedIn's own infographic, own research that they've done into what works. LinkedIn has done the testing themselves, and they found that 38% higher click rate is possible on these posts that have statistics that give some value back to its readers, that have statistics, that have images. They get 38% higher for the rich media, 37% higher click-through rate for stats, and overall 162 more impressions on the content that you're sending out if you've got something that grabs your audience. That's not just, I think we do a great job overall in curating content that we find. We find content, we share it, but we don't grab the member and say, this is why it's so important. Really explain to other users why what they're reading is going to be valuable to them. And along those lines, I think it's important to know how these status updates work. Where are you seeing these, and how can they work for you? So I'm going to take this opportunity right now and switch over to LinkedIn for a second and show you what you see, or what I see, and probably what you see on the LinkedIn homepage. Now, LinkedIn over the last couple of months has switched over all of its layout. Well, I say almost all, because I'm going to show you a company page example where not quite everything is switched over to this layout, but most of its layout to this new look that LinkedIn Groups had for a while, and now practically everything is now switched over. So what you're seeing here is your typical home feed, and this is where the status updates appear. So you can see these great big image shares, certainly can grab attention here. You can see if you scroll down a little bit, pretty soon after maybe your most relevant post in your news feed from 1-8for-Connections will be a sponsored post, promoted post. You can see in this case that's what we see. Great. So as you'll notice, it's structured a little bit like Facebook in that you can have these nice big images with the link, and you can click on it to go directly to the link. And that's what's going to grab someone's attention. If you want someone to see your curated or created content, it's going to take those stats, the big images. Those are super helpful. So some of the other things, as you're seeing as I scroll down, some of the other things you'll see in your home feed: potential jobs. These are also things that you'll see in your home feed when someone likes someone else's status. And this is how the things that are not necessarily directly related to you by connections, but related to you by interest, or what LinkedIn thinks will be interested to you. This is how they show up. You see a connection of yours might like something or share something and it appears. So you can see in small print here, my connection liked this, so it pops up. My connection commented on this, so it pops up. It's funny that I'm demonstrating this and the question is about who's seen posts. Well, we're talking about that very thing right now. Who's seen these posts? All right, back to work. So that's just a quick overview of how things show up in your newsfeed and what the status updates look like if you're not as familiar with using LinkedIn. Just kind of a quick look at what we're looking at when we talk about where status updates and posts and those longer form publishing articles, where those all appear, including some of the interactions that you see. All right, another question for you. Where are the conversations in your industry happening? And again, we don't necessarily have to talk specifically about LinkedIn. We can broaden this out, but it's really important to know where these conversations are happening so you can go there and participate. And again, we'll tie this into a couple of LinkedIn's own tips as we talk about where to join and start conversations. Where are these conversations in your industry happening? And of course, we'll dive into a little bit of how you can be there and participate. So I'll give you some examples. Are they happening in a Facebook group? Are they happening in LinkedIn messages? Are they happening on Twitter? Are there some great conversations happening through videos on YouTube? That's highly possible. If it's certainly possible if your industry skews more toward video, even toward Yelp, if you're on the retail side of things. Where are your industry's conversations happening? Now, of course, in this question, I really intended this to be geared more toward conversations about the industry, so more likely that they wouldn't be happening on those more retail-based sites, but feel free to open it to that if it's relevant to you. So again, in this question, I'm talking about where are conversations about your industry happening? Because that's kind of what we're talking about today with LinkedIn. So feel free to participate as we go through. I'll keep my chat window open, but I want to address this again in terms of what LinkedIn itself recommends. And here are some things that LinkedIn recommends. In-mail messages that are fewer than 1,000 characters. Now, let me back up and talk a little bit about the previous stats as well when I clarify what we're talking about when we say in-mail messages. The stats that LinkedIn, along with Column 5 Media, prepared for its little secret sauce presentation that we're pulling from, these stats are coming from primarily from LinkedIn's paid services. So the way it was testing how interactive and how engaging the posts came from was by testing sponsored posts. And the way it's testing how engaged and interactive in-mail messages are was because they're in-mail, and that's a paid service. So keep that in mind. What we're trying to do today is extrapolate that info and tie it into what you may be doing on an organic level, on an unpaid level, which I think is appropriate. I mean, I think to a large extent, what we're talking about is basically the same interaction, the same engagement techniques, but just specifically tied to the free LinkedIn service. I think you can take a lot of this data and apply it to what a lot of us are doing and want to do on an organic level, even though the original data came from these paid services, because the same principles of grabbing someone's attention on LinkedIn, of communicating directly, communicating precisely, as in this stat that talks about keeping your characters down to minimum, all of those still apply, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. I just wanted to clarify that the original data came from the paid services. But again, the recommendation is keep those interactions brief. And this slide here, what I want to address is knowing where to spend your time and how to spend your words. How to keep everything that you do on LinkedIn very efficient and keep your time management in mind when you do anything on LinkedIn, because I think that's certainly going to be your most valuable resource, is how you spend your time. One thing to keep in mind for knowing where to spend your time and where these interactions and conversations about your company are taking place is to keep in mind the analytics for your company page. Now that LinkedIn has removed a lot of its analytics for the groups, and you don't get to see quite as much information about your own profile and the success of your own profile, one place where LinkedIn has kept a large, robust set of data is in the company page analytics. So a very valuable place to spend some time. Let's go there now. I'm going to switch back over to LinkedIn for a second and go to a second tab I have open and show you the company page. Now, company pages, I sort of teased this a second ago when we were talking about how much LinkedIn has switched over to the new layout. Company pages, as well as sections of groups, one of those places where they're about half and half now. So some of company pages are this new look. In fact, you can even see that it's sort of still in beta testing. I've got a little alert from LinkedIn saying, welcome to the early preview. So half of LinkedIn company pages look like this. Half of them still kind of look like the old LinkedIn company page. And you can see that when I click on analytics. This is sort of the old look. It kind of ties together from an aesthetic point of view to the new LinkedIn with this header up here. But if you remember the old LinkedIn, if you've been on LinkedIn for a while, you'll recognize this as sort of the old format, old fonts, old sizes, and everything. But that aside, this has got some incredibly valuable information for knowing who to talk to and where these conversations are taking place. This is all important data that LinkedIn says is very valuable in terms of keeping your time and efforts efficient on LinkedIn. So at the top, you can see how our updates have done, and from here you can sponsor them or pay for them directly to boost them a little bit. You may be familiar with the term boost if you spent any time on Facebook promotions. You scroll down, you can see some great information about who and how often people are seeing your posts. And again, let me back up. We're talking about company page updates, not personal updates. This is specific to company status updates or company information. Reach, how many people saw it, engagement, how many people clicked on it, likes, comments, incredibly helpful information. I can switch this to a different date range if I choose. I feel like as we scroll down, we just get more and more valuable information. We keep scrolling, we find even more valuable information, including followers. This is an incredibly helpful breakdown of who has clicked follow on our company page, who they are, who from this list of our own followers is in an entry-level position, senior management, manager, director, owner. What do they call themselves? What are their titles? And I can switch this not only from a seniority standpoint, but I can look at, oh, well, let me click. I had to catch up. There we go. But I can look not only at seniority, but at industry. No surprise there that the majority of our company followers for Splash Media U are in marketing, but higher education, of course, that makes total sense. Internet, information technology, just incredible data here, because what this will determine is what kinds of status updates you post. What is going to be most helpful to a marketing person? What is going to be most helpful to someone working in a company of over 1,000 people? What's going to be most, oh, I lost it. Let's scroll back down. What's going to be most helpful to a person in an entry-level position? I mean, in our case, the senior level and entry level are now is kind of a little bit of a chasm there. So you have to kind of figure out how you're gonna differentiate when you're talking to your entry level and when you're talking to your senior level positions. And that actually goes right along with the next poll question we have. But just some great stats to keep in mind here. I can just ramble on forever, as you've noticed, about these analytics because I just find such value here. How you compare to some other sites, your visitors to your page, so not followers, but people who've just seen your page, visitors to your company page. And same demographics here. You can sort by seniority, industry, company size, or function. We didn't really take a look at function in the previous spread there, so we'll take a look at here. So what the job actually is, it encompasses marketing, community, and let's see, media, entrepreneurs, business development. So again, we could spend a whole workshop talking about company analytics, and perhaps we will in a future workshop, but a great resource here to come back to. Let me go back over to our presentation. I want to be mindful of your time today and get to your questions if you have them. So a couple more things to consider when you're talking about where to spend your time and how to make your time on LinkedIn most efficient. Participate in LinkedIn groups if those groups are valuable to you. And I would find the groups that have interactions on the discussions. I think the ones that tend to foster spam and just have thousands and thousands of participants without a lot of engagement and discussion, probably not quite as valuable, because that means you're just shouting into a big arena with nobody shouting back or nobody talking back. So I think the LinkedIn groups where you see discussions with, now you may have to join these and do some experimenting in order to find that out, but the LinkedIn groups where you see replies and comments on these discussions, those are the ones that are going to be most valuable for you to join, talk about the industry. We haven't really gotten into, we won't get a ton into the long form publishing options, but hopefully you've seen for a while now, I'd say the past year or so at least, LinkedIn has offered a really nice blogging style publishing option. So if you want to go beyond just the status update, you can actually write directly blog style on LinkedIn and include things like outbound links, images, lots of great rich media available there, and a great way to share on LinkedIn, especially if you don't already have a blog. If you're on LinkedIn but don't have a blog necessarily, you don't want to start one, at least not right now, this is a great way to become an expert yourself, which is a nice little transition into our final poll question: who is an expert in your industry? And you don't necessarily have to put names in the chat window. If you want to put sort of a general category in the chat window, but think to yourself, who are the people who I would go to if I had a question about an industry, if I had an industry question, I should say, or if I wanted to follow someone's example. You know, you may, or depending on your industry, you may is it time for more coffee yet? You may or may not be open to talking to competitors. So keep that in mind, but who would you go to follow their example? Who would you go to read a blog post, listen to a podcast, check out their website, see what they're doing on LinkedIn? Again, you don't feel pressured to put someone's name in the chat window. You're welcome to, of course, if it's an industry expert you think it's who's worth looking into for the rest of us. But feel free to put a category in the chat window, but think of these names to yourself. Jot them down, because I think it's important to know what they're doing. Follow not just the content that they talk about, but how they're doing it. And I think Julio has provided us a great example of both. Not only the content, but how they're getting the content out there. And that's Gary Vaynerchuk, one of the well-known social media experts, regarded, I think, probably worldwide as an expert in the realm of social media. Several books, lots of resources like videos, podcasts. So certainly a great example of well-known industry expert, in this case, in the world of social media. So the reason I brought that up is because another one of these, pardon me for a second, let me get back to my presentation and go move forward here. Aha, there we go. So the last part that I wanted to touch on, the last part of the secret sauce info that LinkedIn shared, and the reason I tied it in with influencers in your industry is because, going back to that first point I made, the one takeaway I want you to have is because everything you do on LinkedIn should be as personal as possible, because that's how you're going to establish trust, and that's how you're going to get a response. And that's the way you may have noticed, if you follow influencers in your industry, if you follow industry experts, that is how they establish trust. They direct their status updates, their content, to the audience they're talking to. That's that first stat that LinkedIn shared with their secret sauce info that we're tying this back to, is that when these campaigns go out, and again, we're talking about these sponsored campaigns, but I think you can extrapolate this data and talk about your organic campaigns as well. These campaigns that they measured had over 100, almost 200% higher engagement when they directly addressed their audience. And what we're talking about here is making sure that the people who will most value your content know that you're talking to them. So yeah, let me say that one more time, just so you understand what I'm saying. When you come up with a valuable piece of content or a valuable campaign that you want to share with potential customers, with partners, you'll get the most return from your time and money spent developing that content if the people you're talking to know you're talking to them. So you remember that stat that we saw just a second ago when we were looking at the company page analytics for Splash Media U's company page? You remember how you saw that the two biggest classifications of people who were followers of our page were people in entry-level positions and people in senior positions? Again, there's kind of a little bit of a dichotomy there, but that is how you'll get value from your posts. Obviously, we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves and create posts just toward one demographic. So the way we get those clicks and that particular demographic to take notice is we say entry-level. We can come up with a way to say this: entry-level social media marketers, you'll want to see this info, or top 10 little-known Twitter facts for senior level marketers. That's just two examples, but this is how you get those clicks and make the people that you're talking to feel as if you're talking to them, is you actually address them in these campaigns, in this content. The other thing that's important to take away from some of their sponsored tests, their A/B tests, and I think we can, again, something we can take to what we do on a free LinkedIn basis, is that the sponsored in-mail messages got incredibly higher reactions and engagement when they used the person's name in the message. This is something I do and always recommend doing just for myself when I want to connect with somebody, or when I want to invite somebody to a group. When I want all the basic things that you do on LinkedIn, you get so much more engagement when you actually use the person's name, when you actually make the person feel like, shock of all shocks, that you're talking to him or her. And I think this is something we can do regardless of what level LinkedIn we use or how we use LinkedIn. We can address people by their name and make them feel like we are talking directly to them, because we are talking to them. And I think the more we remind people of that we're reaching out and connecting directly, the better success you will see on LinkedIn, because those personal engagements, just like Laurelyn was talking about a few poll questions ago, is the direct contact that makes the most difference. That is what's going to get, in this case, the more blog subscriptions. That's the conversion metric that they were going for. But whatever conversion you're going for, if it's an email list, if it's an event form fill, you're going to see many, many more replies and conversions and leads generated and interactions when you address people directly. I think that cannot be stressed enough. So this is how you're going to establish trust as an influencer yourself. And if you'll notice, the people that you thought of when we asked that question about who are the people that you follow in your industry, or who are the people you feel like you could go to in your industry, I would bet you, and I would love for you to come back after the fact and let me know what you found, I would bet you that is exactly how they're establishing trust with you and with their customers in the industry, is that they are addressing users and members personally and taking the time to do so. And that's exactly how you will establish trust with your customers. I hope you found some of these tips from LinkedIn and from us, Splash Media U, helpful. We kind of combined some of the stats from LinkedIn as well as some of the things that we found and we teach in Splash Media U. Just a quick word about the things that we teach. If you have any questions about our social media training and certification program, please feel free to reach out. You can reach me through at Duncan Gilman on Twitter. You can follow our blog at splashmediau.com or splashmediau on Twitter. Again, I mentioned at the very start that we have recorded this workshop, as we have done all our previous workshops, and we're going to put that recording on YouTube. So feel free to come back to youtube.com/splashmediau for the workshop in its entirety. Thank you so much to Julio Lebron, our phenomenal moderator, and you can find this conversation, of course, back on Twitter using the hashtag #SplashWorkshop. So Julio, thank you to you. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your week.